When we look at the conflicts in our world, whether disputes among our neighbors or wars between nations, the motive is often meeting selfish desires at the expense of others. As believers, we must be attentive to not satisfy ourselves in ways that marginalize, take advantage of, or harm others. We must remain wholly committed to God, yet also engage the broken world around us. The message of the book of James is that once individuals come to faith in Jesus, their lives, their thoughts, and their desires should all be oriented toward what pleases the Lord. Faith and right action should complement one another in the life of the believer, which brings us to our key verse for today, which reads, "Come close to God, and God will come close to you. Wash your hands, you sinners. Purify your hearts, for your loyalty is divided between God and the world." James chapter 4, verse 8. In this passage, James is addressing the community as a whole, not individuals. This is a more detailed explanation of the principle mentioned previously that confusion and disorder result from envy and strife. He asked the believers to identify the origin of wars and fightings among them, and certainly some things are worth fighting for, or at least defending. However, the struggle must be done in a God-honoring way. Unrighteous attitudes come from lust, which can be translated as passion, and this word is not necessarily negative because it can also be translated as pleasure, but in the New Testament it's always used negatively. James continues the military image to suggest that lust or passions are waging wars within individuals. And even today, envy and unfulfilled desires are behind many personal conflicts and national war. James gives two reasons why the believers do not have what they want. The first is simple: they don't have because they do not ask. The second reason is connected to the first: when they ask, they do not receive because they ask wrongly. James then explains what it means to ask wrongly. They ask in order to satisfy their lusts. These believers are operating still within the realm that created their problems in the first place, namely their lusts. To ask only to satisfy one's selfish desire is just as much of a problem as not asking at all. Both are feeding our lust and causing conflict. James contrasts their behavior with the principle that Jesus used in prayer: ask, and it shall be given you. If what we ask is within God's will, we can be confident that He listens to us. James reiterates a point that we cannot serve God and the world at the same time. James's strong language and position are based on his conviction that the believer's confession must match their lifestyle. We cannot authentically proclaim that God is the only one who satisfies us and then seek satisfaction from the world. God is gracious to his children. He gives them grace to live for him when they recognize they need God and submit to his will rather than their own. However, God resists the proud who live in sin by earthly wisdom. Those who believe they are self-sufficient and do not need God, or are self-made, are proud in their own eyes. And this is a common theme in the Old Testament. But verses 7 through 10 are a series of commands. These commands call believers to discard the habits of the old life and to practice these new ones. James recognizes the danger of the devil and calls for the believers to resist him. So the first step is repentance. This is signified by the cleansing of hands, an external action, and the purification of hearts, an internal action. James also calls the believers to be remorseful and mourn over their sins. Humility before God is to recognize our true state as human beings. God is God, we are not. Many preachers have said true humility isn't to think less of yourself, but to think of yourself less. It is recognizing our deep, constant need for God, regardless of what we have. Here's our lesson. God cares for the lost, and he expects us to show his love to the world. This has a direct impact on how we treat others, believers and unbelievers. Let the love of God lead you as you interact with others. Guard against conflict arising from inner desires and ambitions. However, we must take care to make sure that God remains the center of our affection. We cannot allow worldly pleasures and desires to draw us away from God or cause conflict with one another. We must resist the devil, draw near to God, and submit to God every day of our lives, choosing to reflect Christ in intentions and